Greetings, loyal viewers! Now, like I said in the last list, yes, I know I said at the end of my Spyro 3 review that I would do my list for my top 8 PS1 games of all time, and we will get to that soon enough, but after doing my Spyro 3 review, I thought, why not talk a little bit more in depth about my worst and best levels of the Spyro Trilogy. And now, today, we're going to be talking about the best. So, before we get started, same ground rules as before. Firstly, I'm sticking to traditional Spyro levels because, much like with the last list, I think it would make this one just that little bit more interesting. Secondly, I'm not going to be including any flight and/or boss stages. Again, I don't think I have to explain this one now, do I? Thirdly, and remember, much like with the last list, that this is all my opinion. Yes, you may dislike some of the levels, and there are some levels you may think are deserving of being higher on the list, and there's nothing really wrong with that. This is all my opinion, and we're going to be going to talk about my top 8 best Spyro levels of all time from one of my favorite games ever. So, with that said, let us begin the countdown in 3, 2, 1. The way this list is going to be ordered, as opposed to the last one, more or less, is that the entries will be, for the most part, listed from my love of the games themselves. Since, as you all know, Spyro 2 is my personal favorite and Spyro 1 is my least favorite, naturally the early entries on this list will be from the first game, starting with Clifftown. After all, how can I not love a level with a Wild Western look to it, mixed in with the fact that, apparently, the design was also inspired by that of Mos Eisley from Star Wars. That alone just sounds like a recipe for pure awesomeness, and in many respects, it does deliver. While the level, being Spyro 1 again, is yet fairly easy, the layout, the design, the enemies, and hell, even the song in this is actually kind of nice to listen to. Speaking of songs, even though I sadly couldn't get any footage to prove it, if you play the level long enough, the full version of the end credits theme will actually play in this level. And no, I don't mean like an alternate hard version of it, that being the main theme of Misty Bog. I mean like the full version of the end credits track. Little touches like that alone guaranteed it a spot on this list. Now, as for my second favorite level in Spyro 1, I'll just come right out and say it, I am an absolute sucker for the supercharge in the Spyro series. And the way it's used here in High Caves, as well as the next entries on this list, is just a lot of fun to use. And I'll admit, those metallic insects, don't judge me, at the beginning used to petrify me when I was a little kid. Speaking of which, I do love that the level begins with 2 paths to choose. The path with the wizards and the druids, or the aforementioned cave with the metallic insects. Whichever one you choose, they both inevitably lead to the supercharge ramp with the 3 different landings you can make with it. And if you miss either one, don't worry, the fairies in this world will save your life and take you back up to the top of the supercharge ramp. I'll admit, I'm kind of mixed on that decision, hence why it's still low on the list. On the one hand, for younger gamers, this is an effective way of making the level not too punishing, since this is one of the earliest levels to use the supercharge, while on the other hand, I feel it kinda holds the challenge back a little bit for older gamers such as myself. But that's just one notable flaw in an otherwise fun level. And speaking of fun levels involving the supercharge, this is probably going to be one of my more controversial opinions, especially since you were all probably expecting Wizard Peak to be on the list, and while I do like that level personally, I think a good chunk of that enjoyment nowadays as an adult comes purely from the theme alone, and I just simply think that wasn't quite good enough for it to make the cut. Treetops, on the other hand, while the theme may not be quite as memorable to me, the level is the only one in the first game where I still feel somewhat legitimately challenged even as an adult, even if only by a minuscule margin. This level, even more so than High Caves, utilizes the supercharge not only the most, but in a way that's very fun and fast-paced that I just feel a burst of energy inside of me whenever I start running down the ramps. Yeah, that jump you have to make saving the dragon is kind of obnoxious, don't get me wrong, but I feels it's all worth it just to hear Spyro chew out this a-hole for getting himself stuck in such a hard-to-reach place. Chasing after those thieves that carry the 25 purple gem thingies is also very satisfying, with 2 different paths that take you to the exit, with one that literally does lead you directly above the exit. As fun as this level is, it's still not that hard to me, especially as an adult, nor is it the best put together overall, as there are times when it can be a little confusing. Nor does it contain some of the strongest merits. That is where the top 5 comes in. Starting with... Okay, so I'm going to start going a little bit out of order from this point on, since I simply couldn't put this one higher for one notable reason, which we'll talk about in a moment. Some may definitely disagree with me on this. I know at least one person who definitely would. But of all the first levels in the Spyro trilogy, this one is my absolute favorite. It's the most beautiful to look at. It has my all-time favorite tracks in gaming. The challenges, while simple, are a fun way to introduce you to what to expect for the rest of the adventure. In fact, hell, I feel like this whole level is a prime example of starting you off beautifully for the rest of the game. The only thing kind of holding it back is the same reason for most first, or hell, even early levels in the Spyro games tend to have, in that it's still fairly short. In that you can pretty much get through it all in only 10 minutes at best. And I mean if you're playing the level normally, not including you using the double jump exploit to cheat most of it. But for such a short run, it is an incredibly fun first chapter to an incredibly fun adventure that I'm never going to forget. And on that note... Okay, getting a bit back on track with the proper order here. Of all the ice-themed levels in the original trilogy, Icy Peak is honestly my personal favorite, bar none. Yes, even more so than ones like Crystal Glacier, aka the cousin level to Skelos Badlands from Spyro 2. Sorry Spyro 2, I still love you. I was honestly close to choosing Charmed Ridge over this, until I remembered that rather annoying Sergeant Bird mission, and I honestly disliked that one a little bit more than the ice skating mission. Everything about this level I just really like. The aesthetic is gorgeous, the music possibly being among my top 3 favorite tracks from Spyro 3. Oh, and fun facts about this level's inhabitants, Bob and Doug. The inhabitants of this place are based off of Bob and Doug McKenzie, characters from the Great White North sketch on the TV series SCTV. That is actually kind of cute. Speaking of names, the egg you get after completing the aforementioned ice skating mission is named after Mark Cerny, the former vice president of Universal Interactive who worked closely with Insomniac Games and Naughty Dog during that time period. So you might be thinking, well, with those merits and even little things like that, as to why this just barely missed the top 3 for me. Well, for as good as these merits are, not only are they, in my opinion, not quite the peak of this series' quality, so to speak, but also, even though I do find the Sergeant Bird mission in Charmed Ridge to be more annoying, that's definitely not to say that the ice skating mission is among my favorites either. But enough about a level that's icy cold, let's go to somewhere much warmer, such as... If I could basically describe this level in one sentence, it's kind of like Enchanted Towers if it was done correctly. The challenges are of a more consistent quality for me, even if I feel as though the herding the cowlicks back at the pen can get a little tedious. The level looks more visually pleasing in my eye, the song is catchier, the inhabitants I think have a more interesting look to them, with one that's clearly just a dude named Little Bo Peep, mixed in with the fact that it's a frigging large as hell level, yet it never once feels too dull to me. And you can imagine why I put it at the opposite list at number 3. Needless to say, I friggin' love this level. And even its warring level, Breeze Harbor, actually isn't that bad either. Despite, well...
Trouble with the trolley, eh?
Yeah, that. As great levels go, though, there really isn't as much as I can really say about this one despite it being at number 3. It is basically a more or less what you see is what you get kind of gigantic level that's done fantastically. However, I can definitely say just that little bit more about the final 2 entries on this list, starting with... Well, it wouldn't be a best Spyro levels list without this one being very high on the list now, wouldn't it? Some of you are probably thinking that this should definitely be at number 1, and I wouldn't necessarily blame you for thinking that. However, there is at least one notable reason as to why this one just barely missed the number 1 spot for me, that we'll get to in a moment. Let us go over things that does make this level an absolute fan favorite for a lot of people. First off, the music! Second, while the layout of the level may not necessarily be the best put together compared to some of the others, the design of it as well as the enemies themselves I think more than make up for that. Talking about the minigames themselves, the first one is a simple one where you have to traverse many obstacles and tricky enemy placements, so to speak, in order to reach an egg. Honestly, for something so simple, it's actually kind of fun. The second, being my personal favorite, at least in theory, is where you use a Super Flame and Super Fly power-up combo to fight 2 Chinese dragons. It actually kind of reminded me a little bit of that final mission from Metropolis in Spyro 2, except it's a mini-boss, and I honestly found it to be a little more fun, despite the fact that killing them when they're just an inkling away from their demise can get a little tedious at times. But, speaking of tedious, let's talk about my least favorite minigame, at least in terms of its overall execution in this level, the first-person Agent 9 mission. While I definitely hate Bentley's minigames more for how slow and tedious they are, especially that boxing minigame, Agent 9 when playing in a first-person perspective here is also kind of slow and tedious for my liking, despite how rather easy this is, and even the on-rails minigame in Dino Mines. Making things even worse, much like that minigame, the aiming is rather slow and tedious, making to where trying to hit multiple enemies as well as reacting quick enough from the ones that are right behind you in time to retaliate can be kind of a pain in the ass at times, and you're bound to be hit at least a couple of times. Oh, and rule of thumb, make sure that you start this minigame with sparks at full health, otherwise you're liable to get screwed over at the start. Now before we get to number 1, a few honorable mentions. Wizard Peak. The level itself may not be all that great, but the theme song itself is among the catchiest in the franchise. Plus, I'm still a sucker for the supercharge, and this level still implements it well enough. Breeze Harbor. Zephyr may be better in my honest opinion, but the warring level in which you assist the Breeze builders, God how can you not love these names, is still pretty fun too. Aquaria Towers. I'm also not usually a fan of water levels in games, but Spyro is one of those exceptions, and Aquaria Towers is a prime example of that, as well as Seashell Shore. Aquaria Towers may have set the standard for a good Spyro water level, but in my opinion, Seashell Shore took it to new heights with tons of fun minigames and even a catchier theme song in my honest opinion as well. And the number 1 best level of the Spyro trilogy is Skelos Badlands. I know, much like the last entry, that this is kind of a cliche to put in this particular list, and you might be thinking, why at number 1 and even higher? Well, like any countdown, again, this is all purely subjective, and you're bound to disagree with me here and there, and that's fine. And I also tend to judge these particular things on how much of an impression they have left on me ever since. And as much as I absolutely adore Fireworks Factory, this level, even more so than the previous, just makes me feel like I'm right back at the time when I first played this as a little kid. So let's talk about it. While I'll admit the theme for this level may not be as epic or memorable as the one for Fireworks Factory, everything else about this level I just can't get enough of. The aesthetic is great, the colors just pop, especially for something that's supposed to be a Badlands, but honestly this is way more fun looking than most Badlands you would see in real life. The challenges are still a lot of fun, the inhabitants are funny as hell, especially those ones you have to save from the flame sorcerers. The enemies are nice and creative, like the aforementioned flame sorcerers. It's just, I just feel like a little kid again whenever I play this level every time. And hey, the developers, much like with Fireworks Factory apparently, must have loved it the same as all we did because they used both levels as the main title screen for their respective games. If that alone doesn't guarantee just how amazing these levels are, then I don't know what will. This is also one of the few levels that introduces the shield power-up that allows you to walk on lava for a short amount of time, which is always kind of neat. Granted, there's only like 2, maybe 3 places in the level where this is used, but I don't care. I love me some power-ups. And this, as well as every other level in Spyro 2 for that matter, still cleverly uses the power-up to its advantage. Now, in the end, I hope at least some of you can understand why, in my honest opinion, Skelos Badlands is the best Spyro level of them all. So those were my top 8 best Spyro levels of all time, and if you haven't seen the worst, don't worry, I'll leave a link to that in the description down below, sorry. So, as you can imagine, this, as well as the last list, were very tough to make because the Spyro Trilogy is something precious to my childhood and is something I will continue to hold close to my heart, even to the day I die. So, and even though Spyro 1, for as dated as it may be, is still fun to play, and even though I do love Spyro 2 and Spyro 3 almost as equally, Spyro 2, in my opinion, took everything that was already established with the first game and perfected it to a T, and in my opinion, more so than Spyro 3 anyway, was a more consistent game from beginning to end. So, I know a lot of you were still expecting my favorite PS1 games, and we will get to that soon enough, don't worry about it. I just felt like wanting to do something to talk more in depth about Spyro before the end of his 20-year anniversary, especially since this was the month of his original release date for the Reignited Trilogy, which I'll definitely be talking more about that in depth when that comes out in November. And until then, I'm King Gargantuas, and I'll see you all next time. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to me if you want to see more videos like this. Follow me on Twitter at King Gargantuas if you want to know what I'm up to. And if you want to support videos like this plus the many other ideas that I have in the near future, be sure to support me on patreon.com/KingGargantuas. Thanks again guys, and I'll see you all next time.